The courtroom was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that seemed to press against the walls and seep into every corner. Even the faint rustle of papers felt loud, amplified in the tense atmosphere. Every eye was fixed forward, and yet there was a subtle undercurrent of anticipation that no one could put into words. This was not just another trial in the small town of Cedarville, United States. This was a case that had rattled the community, one that had made parents clutch their children a little tighter and neighbors whisper nervously behind closed doors. At the back of the courtroom, in a row of polished wooden benches, sat a little girl named Lily. She was only 3 years old, yet there was something about the way she observed the room that made her seem older than her years. Clad in a simple yellow dress with little white flowers stitched along the hem, she clutched her mother's hand. Her tiny fingers intertwined with her mother, holding on as if she could absorb the adult strength around her. Lily's eyes, wide and luminous, darted around the room, not out of restlessness but with a careful, thoughtful curiosity. She noticed the way the accused shifted nervously in his chair, the subtle twitch of a lawyer's hand as he leafed through notes, the almost imperceptible furrow of the judge's brow. Every movement, every glance, every hesitation registered in her mind. At the front of the room, the real center of attention was Rex, a majestic German Shepherd police dog. His sleek black and tan coat gleamed under the overhead lights, and his muscles were taut with anticipation. Beside him stood Officer Daniels, his posture straight, a picture of professional control. Rex was no ordinary dog. He was a trained K9, a partner in countless investigations, a silent sentinel capable of detecting danger and uncovering truths humans sometimes missed. Today, he had been brought into the courtroom not only to demonstrate his abilities, but as a part of the investigation that had brought everyone together in this hushed space. The judge, a tall, imposing man with spectacles perched on the bridge of his nose, called the court to order. His voice, though calm, carried an unmistakable authority. "Court is now in session," he said, and the room seemed to inhale as one. The murmur of whispers faded, leaving only the soft creak of the wooden floorboards and the rhythmic tapping of a pen on a legal pad. Lawyers and officers straightened, the accused's eyes darting nervously from side to side, and the jury members shifted in their seats, all acutely aware that the stakes were high. Meanwhile, Lily's mother, Margaret, sat tensely, her gaze alternating between her daughter and the proceedings. She knew her little girl had been a witness to fragments of the events surrounding the crime, small glimpses that adults had dismissed at the time, but she had no idea how much Lily had remembered. Margaret smiled gently at her daughter, whispering, "Stay calm, honey, just stay with me." Lily's response was a barely perceptible nod, her attention unwavering. Even at 3, she understood more than anyone realized. The case itself involved a burglary that had escalated into a dangerous confrontation. The accused, a man in his late 30s, had been apprehended after a frantic chase through the neighborhood. He had been linked to several break-ins, but this one had left lasting scars on the community. Families were shaken, the sense of safety disrupted, and the town had been on edge ever since. The courtroom was now the place where clarity, truth, and justice were to be determined. Yet, as the adults debated evidence and recounted details, it was a small child who had been quietly piecing together the puzzle in her own mind. Officer Daniels began to speak about Rex, explaining the dog's role in investigations, his training, and the skills that made him invaluable in the field. "Rex has assisted in countless cases," the officer said, his voice steady but carrying a note of pride. "He can detect scents humans cannot, track suspects, and help bring clarity in chaotic situations." The courtroom listened politely, some skeptically, some with genuine curiosity, but none were paying attention to Lily. She, however, was watching with an intensity that bordered on awe. Every movement Rex made, every subtle shift in his posture, registered in her mind. It was as if she understood, in a way the adults did not, that this dog held power, power that could reveal the truth. Time seemed to stretch as the proceedings continued. Witnesses were called, statements read, and the accused's lawyer interjected with carefully measured words designed to sow doubt. Margaret held her daughter close, feeling the warmth of Lily's small hand pressed against hers. She tried to maintain composure, but her heart raced with the awareness that her daughter had seen more than anyone suspected. In the quiet moments between statements, Lily's gaze lingered on the accused, and a flicker of recognition passed across her face. Her mind replayed the scenes she had witnessed: the hurried footsteps, the glint of a hand reaching for a window, the shadowy figure darting across the street. The room was silent, yet charged with an invisible energy. Every creak of the bench, every shuffle of paper, every cough seemed amplified. The adults were tense, focused on the technicalities of the law and the meticulous presentation of evidence. But Lily's attention was unwavering. Her mind was connecting fragments that had seemed insignificant at the time: the direction the suspect had run, the specific shoes she had glimpsed, the unique motion of his hand as he tried to hide something. These details, invisible to the grown-ups, were pieces of a puzzle that only a child could complete. Margaret noticed a subtle change in her daughter. Lily's tiny body shifted slightly forward in her seat, her fingers clutching more tightly and her eyes locked on someone in the room. She wasn't fidgeting out of boredom. She was ready to reveal something only she knew. The judge called for a brief recess, and whispers rippled through the courtroom, but Lily remained calm. She was observing, remembering, and waiting. The hushed courtroom was oblivious to the storm, about to be unleashed by the smallest voice present. As Officer Daniels prepared to demonstrate Rex's tracking skills, the tension in the room thickened. The adults were focused on the procedural aspects of the demonstration, unaware that the true revelation was about to come from an unexpected source. Lily's eyes followed every step, every scent motion, every subtle signal from Rex. And in her small, attentive mind, a moment of clarity was forming, a moment that would shock the courtroom, alter the course of the trial, and reveal the truth in a way no one had anticipated. In that quiet, tense courtroom, with all the weight of the law pressing down on everyone present, no one expected that a 3-year-old girl would soon become the center of attention. A child's innocence, a dog's training, and the unnoticed fragments of observation were converging. And at that very moment, Lily's finger twitched slightly, unnoticed by most, signaling the first movement of an event that would leave everyone in stunned silence. The courtroom, unaware of the revelation brewing, continued its proceedings, but the calm, measured air was about to be broken by a voice too small to command authority, yet too truthful to ignore. Lily, in her quiet, deliberate way, had noticed everything, and she was ready to speak. 2 nights before the trial, Cedarville had been plunged into chaos. The quiet streets, lined with oak trees swaying gently in the night breeze, had been broken by the sharp sound of shattering glass. The Miller family's home, usually a sanctuary of laughter and warmth, had been invaded. A masked intruder had slipped through a window, careful yet hurried, moving with the precision of someone who had done this before. Inside, the family had been asleep, unaware of the danger creeping into their lives. By morning, the entire neighborhood would feel the ripple of fear left behind. Detective Harris, a seasoned officer with a calm demeanor, had arrived at the scene shortly after the alarm. Broken shards of glass glittered across the porch like tiny diamonds, reflecting the pale streetlight. Inside, furniture had been disturbed, drawers left open, valuables tossed haphazardly. Though the house had not been fully ransacked, the intruder had taken enough to alarm the family and unsettle the community. The detective walked slowly through the rooms, noting footprints, scuff marks, and small details that might indicate the suspect's movements. Every piece of evidence mattered. Every overlooked clue could make the difference between solving the crime and allowing a criminal to vanish. Meanwhile, in the corner of the living room, a small figure watched from behind the couch. It was Lily, only 3, who had been staying with her babysitter nearby. Her mother had been out for a late meeting, unaware that her daughter had wandered close to the scene. From her hidden vantage point, Lily had seen the masked intruder. She had noted the way he moved, the slight limp in his right leg, the way his hand hesitated as he fumbled with a window latch. At the time, no adult had noticed. Her observations had been filed away in her young, impressionable mind, details so vivid they would later astonish those in the courtroom. The next morning, news of the burglary spread like wildfire through Cedarville. Neighbors gathered on porches and sidewalks, talking in hushed tones. Children whispered to each other about the masked man. Fear and curiosity mixed in equal measure, with the adults scrambling to understand how such an intrusion could have happened in their otherwise peaceful town. The police worked diligently, gathering statements, photographs, and fingerprints. Yet despite their efforts, the suspect seemed to have vanished without leaving a trail substantial enough to track him immediately. The town, usually secure and familiar, suddenly felt vulnerable, as if shadows were hiding in every corner. At the police station, Detective Harris pored over the evidence. He cataloged fingerprints, analyzed the points of entry, and reviewed surveillance footage from nearby houses. The intruder had been careful but not flawless. There were subtle inconsistencies: the angle of a broken window, the fingerprints on a doorknob, the trail of mud on the hardwood floor. To an adult trained in observation, these were hints pointing toward a suspect. But there was more, something deeper, something subtle that could only be recalled by someone who had seen the details firsthand. And unbeknownst to the adults, that someone was Lily. Lily's mother, Margaret, had been frantic the night of the burglary. She had rushed home as soon as she received the call, only to find Lily safe at the babysitter, unaware of the danger she had narrowly avoided. Margaret had hugged her daughter tightly, trying to suppress her panic. "You're safe now, honey," she whispered repeatedly. Lily, sensing her mother's fear, clung to her hand but didn't cry. Instead, she seemed thoughtful, replaying the images she had seen in the night. The intruder's cautious steps, the pattern of movement, the way he had tilted his head as if listening for sounds. These images were etched in her memory, forming the foundation for what would later become a critical moment in court. Over the next days, the investigation intensified. Officers visited neighboring homes, asking questions, checking for witnesses. Some had vague recollections: a shadow moving past a window, the muffled sound of footsteps, the faint scraping of metal. Each account added layers to the story but lacked specificity. The adults were focused on evidence they could verify, yet they overlooked the most precise witness, the small child who had seen the events unfold. Lily's memory was accurate in ways no adult testimony could match. Every minor detail she had noticed would later provide a clarity that the seasoned officers could not achieve alone. On the morning of the trial, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. News outlets had caught wind of the case, and reporters jostled for position, cameras and microphones at the ready. The accused, a man named Carl Benson, sat nervously, flanked by his lawyer. He avoided eye contact with anyone, shifting in his seat as though the walls themselves were closing in. Officers present whispered to each other, discussing the evidence, but no one suspected that the game would change so dramatically once Lily's small voice entered the room. Officer Daniels had been briefed on the K-9 demonstration. Rex, a calm yet alert German shepherd, had been instructed to track scents and respond to cues. He was an experienced police dog, trained to detect hidden threats, locate suspects, and assist in critical situations. As he sat at the front of the courtroom, his ears twitched, eyes scanning, body poised for action. Rex's presence was meant to demonstrate law enforcement's readiness, but in the minutes that followed, he would become the instrument that confirmed the truth Lily had quietly held in her mind. Margaret watched Lily carefully, aware of the child's attentive gaze. Something was different today. Lily seemed focused, almost serious in her expression. Margaret bent down slightly and whispered, "Sweetheart, stay with me." Lily nodded faintly but did not avert her eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the front of the courtroom, tracking movements, analyzing subtle gestures, and remembering every motion from the night of the burglary. The details she had absorbed, unnoticed by adults, were now ready to surface in a way that would astonish everyone. As the courtroom settled and the trial began, Lily's small mind worked methodically. She remembered the angle of the intruder's steps, the limp in his gait, the precise way his hand moved when he reached for objects. These details were like puzzle pieces, waiting for the right moment to fit together. She did not yet speak, but her awareness was acute. The adults focused on legal procedures, forensic reports, and witness testimonies, oblivious to the fact that the child sitting quietly behind them carried knowledge that could turn the case upside down. By the time Officer Daniels prepared Rex for the demonstration, tension in the courtroom had reached its peak. Every adult was focused on the dog and the procedure, reviewing the case in their minds, considering the evidence and anticipating the outcome. Meanwhile, Lily's small frame shifted forward slightly, her gaze locked on one person, Carl Benson, the accused. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, subtle yet unmistakable. She had seen him in the night, and every motion, every detail was seared into her memory. The stage was set, the players in position, and a single moment would soon disrupt the quiet confidence of the courtroom. In that moment, the narrative of Cedarville's most remarkable trial hung in the balance. Adults assumed they understood the case, relying on evidence, procedure, and testimony. They underestimated the insight of a child who had observed the truth with perfect clarity. Lily's presence, small and unassuming, carried the power to reveal what even the most experienced officers and lawyers could not. The calm before the storm was ending, and soon all eyes would turn to the smallest witness, whose voice, so gentle and innocent, would change the course of justice forever. The courtroom had never felt so heavy. Every person inside seemed to be holding their breath, as if inhaling too deeply might disrupt the fragile balance of anticipation. The wooden benches creaked under shifting weight, pens tapped nervously on legal pads, and the subtle scent of polished wood mingled with the faint tang of fear. Outside, the town of Cedarville waited, unaware that inside the courthouse, a drama more profound than any headline was unfolding. Carl Benson, the accused, sat rigid in his chair, fingers fidgeting against the smooth armrest. His eyes darted constantly, never quite meeting anyone else's gaze. The occasional twitch of his shoulder or the slight tilt of his head betrayed a nervousness he could not fully conceal. Every movement was magnified in the courtroom's hushed atmosphere, every glance dissected by the sharp eyes of the jury. His lawyer, a man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, leaned over to whisper, but even the whispered counsel seemed insignificant compared to the tension radiating from the young accused. At the back of the courtroom, Lily sat still. Her mother, Margaret, tried to mask her own anxiety, adjusting her daughter's yellow dress and whispering reassurance. But it wasn't just the formal proceedings capturing Lily's attention. Her tiny gaze was focused on Carl Benson, her mind replaying the night of the burglary, connecting pieces that adults had overlooked. She remembered the shadowy figure moving through the Miller home, the careful but uneven steps, the fleeting glimpse of a limp in his gait. Adults might call her observations trivial, but in her mind, every detail was vital. The prosecution began their case, standing with a calm confidence. Detective Harris recounted the investigation, detailing the footprints, fingerprints, and scuff marks left behind. He spoke of the meticulous collection of evidence and the careful review of surveillance footage, highlighting the methods used to track the suspect. The jury listened intently, occasionally jotting notes, while reporters scribbled furiously. The courtroom seemed to pulse with every word, the tension rising like a tide ready to break. Yet even as the adults discussed evidence, none considered that the truest witness might be the child quietly observing from the back. Margaret noticed subtle signs of comprehension in Lily. Her daughter's small hands were clenched in her lap, eyes unwavering, following every gesture, every pause, every inflection. Lily was absorbing, analyzing, and memorizing. Every subtle twitch of Carl Benson's face, every nervous adjustment of his clothing, every minor gesture, the child noticed it all. To an adult, these were background movements, insignificant. But in Lily's mind, they were pieces of a puzzle waiting to fit together. Margaret's heart raced as she realized just how attentive her daughter was, a tiny observer in a room filled with so much adult complexity. The defense attorney then rose, voice smooth and persuasive. He sought to introduce doubt, questioning the clarity of evidence, suggesting alternative possibilities and highlighting inconsistencies that might sway the jury. His tone was calm, almost hypnotic, but beneath it ran a subtle urgency, as if he sensed the trial could tilt in unexpected directions. The jurors leaned forward, absorbing each argument, while the judge maintained a steady presence at the bench, eyes keenly monitoring every exchange. Even Officer Daniels remained composed, nodding the careful choreography of legal argument and counterargument. Meanwhile, Rex, the police dog, sat at the front, alert but composed. His ears twitched at the sound of every voice, his eyes scanning the room, body poised for action. He had been trained to detect even subtle cues, changes in posture, the scent of nervousness, micro-expressions invisible to most humans. The officers had demonstrated his abilities countless times, but in the courtroom the stakes were higher. Rex's presence added a layer of silent authority, an unspoken reminder that law enforcement had tools beyond human perception. And Lily, from her vantage point, noticed him too, her gaze flicking between the dog and the suspect, forming a connection that adults could not yet understand. Witnesses were called, each offering their accounts of the night of the burglary. Neighbors described fleeting shadows and muffled noises. Friends of the Miller family recounted conversations and observations that seemed minor but formed the background of the narrative. The courtroom absorbed these testimonies politely, yet the underlying tension remained. Every observer, adult and child alike, could sense the weight of uncertainty, the fragile boundary between conviction and doubt. Lily, in her quiet seat, mentally replayed her own observations, each memory aligning with the testimony, each fragment sharpening the clarity in her young mind. A sudden moment of silence fell when the prosecution introduced Rex for a demonstration. The dog moved with grace, precision, and focus, sniffing the air, circling the suspect, and responding to subtle commands. The adults watched with admiration and curiosity, noting the dog's skill in tracking scents and identifying cues. Yet none noticed the spark of recognition in Lily's eyes. Her tiny finger twitched subtly as she studied Rex's behavior, noting patterns, recalling movements from the night of the crime. Every instinct, every detail aligned perfectly in her mind. She was ready, though no one yet realized it. Margaret's heart pounded. She whispered softly, trying to keep her daughter calm, but her words were nearly drowned out by the room's tension. Lily remained still, focused, almost statuesque. She wasn't restless or distracted. She was thinking, analyzing, and preparing. Every adult assumed she was merely present, a small child observing without comprehension. But Lily's mind had connected dots that adults had ignored. She remembered Carl Benson's precise steps, the way he had reached for objects, and the subtle limp in his gait. These details, seemingly inconsequential, formed a chain of evidence in her young mind. The courtroom seemed to stretch time itself, each second lingering, heavy with anticipation. Lawyers argued, witnesses testified, Rex demonstrated, yet the climax had not yet arrived. The adults were focused on procedure, evidence, and the dog's performance, unaware that the pivotal moment would come from the smallest witness in the room. Lily's mother could only watch, a mix of pride and nervous anticipation washing over her. Her daughter's insight, honed through careful observation, had quietly grown in importance. Soon, that quiet observation would pierce the courtroom's tense atmosphere and shift everything. And then, almost imperceptibly, Lily's gaze fixed on Carl Benson. Her tiny finger moved slightly, unnoticed by most, as the pieces she had memorized began to align. She remembered the intruder's shadowy form, the hurried yet cautious steps, the limp that made his movements unique. She recalled the hand motions, the way objects were handled, and the fleeting expressions on the masked face. In her mind, a moment of clarity formed. Soon, the entire courtroom would experience the shock of a 3-year-old's insight. a revelation that adults, lawyers, and officers could not have predicted. The tension, the anticipation, the quiet weight of the courtroom, all of it was about to be broken by a small voice that carried the authority of truth. The adults remained unaware, absorbed in legal procedure and the demonstration of Rex's abilities, yet Lily held the key to unearthing the truth. A child, a dog, and fragments of observation from a night of fear were converging. The stage was set for the moment that would change the course of the trial and leave everyone in stunned silence. The courtroom had reached a near-palpable tension, the kind of stillness that made every footstep, every shuffling of papers resonate like a drumbeat in a cavern. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, signaling the next segment of the proceedings, the demonstration of Rex, the police dog. Officer Daniels, a tall man with a steady presence, stepped forward, giving the dog a reassuring pat. "Rex, this is your chance to show the jury what you're trained to do," he said calmly, his voice measured but carrying a hint of pride. Rex's ears perked, his dark, intelligent eyes scanning the room, muscles taut but poised. The prosecution explained to the jury how K9 demonstrations worked. "Rex has been trained to detect scents, follow trails, and respond to subtle cues," Officer Daniels said. "His training has been instrumental in solving numerous cases. Today, he will help us show the connection between the suspect and the crime." The jurors nodded, some leaning forward in anticipation. The accused, Carl Benson, shifted uneasily in his chair, his hands clenching the edge of the bench. He had not expected the demonstration, and though he tried to maintain composure, his eyes betrayed a flicker of apprehension. Rex was led to the center of the room. The dog moved with grace and precision, circling the courtroom as Officer Daniels instructed him. He sniffed the air, lifted his head, and focused on the faint scents left behind in the space. The jurors watched intently, impressed by the dog's calm but alert demeanor. Every subtle movement, every flick of his ears, conveyed a silent intelligence honed through years of meticulous training. While the adults observed his performance as a demonstration of skill, Lily's small eyes followed more than the dog. She tracked Carl Benson's every motion, noting the suspect's micro-expressions, the way he shifted his weight, the subtle twitch in his shoulder. Margaret, seated behind her daughter, felt a mixture of awe and nervous anticipation. She whispered softly, trying to keep Lily calm. "Honey, just stay with me," she murmured. Lily responded with a faint nod but did not avert her eyes. Something in the demonstration had caught her attention, something that connected the memory of that terrifying night to the present moment. Every detail, the limp in the intruder's step, the hand motions, the precise movements of objects, surfaced in her memory with clarity that stunned Margaret, though she had no idea how to explain it. Officer Daniels began instructing Rex to follow a trail, explaining to the jury how the dog identified objects or individuals by scent. Rex moved methodically, sniffing each area, circling the suspect, and responding to commands with near-perfect precision. The courtroom was quiet, with only the soft sound of paws on the polished floor breaking the tense stillness. Some jurors leaned forward, clearly impressed, while others murmured to one another about the dog's extraordinary capabilities. The accused, Carl Benson, visibly stiffened, his eyes darting nervously toward the dog as if sensing something he could not explain. Lily's finger twitched slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture. Margaret noticed it but dismissed it as restlessness. Yet Lily's gaze was fixed, focused with an intensity that belied her age. She wasn't distracted, she was observing. She watched the subtle changes in Carl Benson's posture, the brief flicker of recognition in his eyes, the slight tension in his muscles as Rex approached. Every detail from the night of the burglary, the shadowy figure, the hurried movements, the cautious handling of objects, aligned with what she now saw. Her tiny mind had formed a map of evidence that no adult had pieced together. The prosecution guided Rex closer to the suspect. The dog paused, sniffing the air, and his eyes locked on Carl Benson. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a faint crack in the composure of the adults. Rex's body tensed, his trained instincts recognizing what his handlers could only confirm through careful observation. The jurors murmured in anticipation, sensing something remarkable was about to happen. Officer Daniels held Rex steady, allowing the dog to process the scents and surroundings fully. The room seemed to collectively inhale, aware that the demonstration had taken on a gravity beyond the ordinary. Lily's tiny voice had not yet spoken, but her mind had fully processed the scene. She remembered the night of the burglary with perfect clarity. The precise angles of the intruder's steps, the uneven rhythm of his movements, the way he had reached for items, every detail replayed in her memory. Adults assumed she was a passive observer, incapable of comprehending the significance of what was happening. But Lily had noticed. She had understood. And as Rex drew closer to the suspect, the alignment between her memory and the dog's trained instincts became undeniable. Margaret could feel her heart racing. She whispered, "Lily, what are you thinking, sweetheart?" But Lily only leaned slightly forward, her finger twitching in a direction no adult had yet considered. Her gaze remained locked on Carl Benson. Every tiny gesture, every minute observation, every piece of memory aligned. She was ready to act, ready to reveal the truth that had been quietly accumulating in her mind since the night of the crime. It was only a matter of moments before her innocence and clarity would pierce the tense courtroom atmosphere. Rex circled again, now drawing closer to Carl Benson. The dog's focus was unwavering, a silent confirmation of what Lily had already identified. Jurors exchanged glances, sensing something extraordinary was occurring, though none yet understood the child's role. The accused shifted in his seat, his composure fraying. There was a growing tension, a rising anticipation, that suggested the ordinary demonstration of law enforcement was about to be interrupted by something far more powerful, a revelation from an unexpected witness. Finally, Rex paused directly in front of Carl Benson, body tense but composed, sniffing carefully. The room was utterly silent. The jurors leaned forward, officers exchanged glances, and the judge raised an eyebrow, sensing the gravity of the moment. Lily's mind connected the dots fully. The figure she had seen on the night of the burglary, the specific movements and gestures, and the way Rex had responded now pointed to one undeniable conclusion. The courtroom's collective focus, previously on procedure and evidence, was about to be redirected toward a voice too small to command authority but too truthful to ignore. Margaret noticed Lily's tiny hand rise slightly, her finger pointing with an almost imperceptible motion. The girl's lips moved, forming words that had yet to escape. There was a palpable pause in the courtroom, as if the room itself sensed that something monumental was about to happen. Carl Benson's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of fear crossing his features. Rex, attuned to the smallest cues, maintained his focus. The moment of revelation was imminent, a convergence of innocence, trained skill, and a memory that had remained hidden from adults until now. And then, just before the courtroom reached its breaking point of tension, Lily's voice, small but clear, prepared to pierce the silence. Every observer, from juror to officer to lawyer, was poised unknowingly for the shock that would follow. The culmination of the night of the burglary, the meticulous investigation, and the quiet observation of a 3-year-old child were about to collide in a single, astonishing instant. The demonstration had become more than a display of skill. It was the prelude to a revelation that no one would forget. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was on Rex, the police dog, circling the room, moving closer to the suspect with measured, practiced steps. Carl Benson, the accused, sat rigid, hands gripping the edge of the bench. His calm facade was crumbling, though he tried desperately to maintain composure. Lawyers whispered to each other, jurors leaned forward in anticipation, and even the judge, usually unflappable, narrowed his eyes as he watched the unfolding scene. The tension in the air was almost tangible. At the back of the room, little Lily shifted slightly in her seat. Her yellow dress, embroidered with delicate white flowers, rustled softly as she leaned forward. Margaret, her mother, noticed the movement but assumed it was a restless gesture, the natural fidgeting of a 3-year-old trying to stay still for so long. But Lily was not restless. Her finger was poised, her mind fully alert. She had replayed the night of the burglary countless times in her head, remembering the subtle details. The way the intruder moved, the uneven steps, the hand that hesitated as it reached for objects. Every fragment had been stored, waiting for the right moment. The dog's attention now focused directly on Carl Benson. Rex's ears perked, his head tilted slightly, and his tail remained stiff but not threatening. Officer Daniels maintained a calm hold on the leash, his hand steady, knowing the dog was trained to respond but also recognizing that this was an extraordinary moment in a courtroom, unlike any other. The jurors noticed the subtle changes in Rex's posture, the way he studied Carl, the careful sniffing, the slight circling. Something about the dog's behavior made the room aware that this was more than a demonstration. Something significant was happening. Lily's tiny finger twitched imperceptibly. She had waited patiently, absorbing every movement and sound, processing each subtle cue. She had noticed the nervous shift in Carl's eyes, the subtle tightening of his shoulders, the faint tremor in his hands. Adults had overlooked these details, focusing on legal arguments, forensic reports, and procedural precision. But Lily, in her innocence, saw the truth clearly. Her mind had connected the dots between the events she had witnessed the night of the burglary and the presence of the suspect now sitting in the courtroom. Margaret felt a surge of anxiety mixed with awe. She whispered softly, "Honey, what is it? What are you going to say?" Lily's lips moved slightly, forming words, but no sound had yet emerged. Her finger pointed subtly in the direction of the accused. It was a moment of quiet anticipation, the calm before a storm. Everyone in the room, except Margaret and Lily, was focused on Rex, the dog, and the procedural demonstration. No one realized that a revelation was about to come from the smallest witness present. Then it happened. In a voice so small, yet precise and startling in the heavy silence, Lily spoke the words that would shock everyone. "That one." The room froze. A collective gasp rose from the courtroom, breaking the long-held stillness. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. Carl Benson's face went pale, a flicker of fear crossing his features. The jurors sat upright, eyes fixed on the small child who had just pointed an accusing finger at the man they had been scrutinizing for hours. Lawyers exchanged stunned glances, and the judge leaned forward, adjusting his spectacles, clearly trying to process the event before him. The weight of those two words rippled through the courtroom. A 3-year-old had identified the suspect. The simplicity of the words, "that one," carried an undeniable authority, amplified by the precision of her pointing finger and the calm certainty in her voice. No adult could ignore it. Even Officer Daniels, trained to observe subtle behavioral cues, paused and looked at the child, realizing that Lily had noticed something critical that no one else had seen. Rex, responding instinctively to the subtle cues, now stood fully alert in front of Carl Benson. His gaze was fixed, unwavering. Every muscle in the dog's body communicated recognition, attention, and a readiness to act if needed. The adults understood immediately that Rex was responding to the correct target. The alignment between Lily's identification and the dog's trained instincts was undeniable. The courtroom was enveloped in stunned silence, a shared acknowledgement that the ordinary order of events had been interrupted by extraordinary perception. Carl Benson's composure began to unravel. He shifted uneasily, swallowing hard, eyes darting nervously from Rex to Lily. For the first time in the trial, he appeared truly confronted, not by the adult testimony, not by evidence, but by the innocent clarity of a child's observation. Every subtle gesture, every moment of hesitation that adults had dismissed now carried a glaring significance. The recognition in Lily's eyes and her deliberate pointing were unassailable. Adults, jurors, officers, and reporters alike felt the room tilt with the weight of an undeniable truth. Margaret struggled to remain composed. Her daughter had just done something remarkable, something no one could have predicted. The pride she felt was mingled with a spike of fear. Lily was 3, a tiny child thrust into a situation far beyond her years. But there was no hesitation, no doubt. Lily's certainty was palpable, radiating through the courtroom with an intensity that demanded recognition. The adults had to take notice. The innocence of her declaration made it impossible to dismiss. The jurors, previously absorbed in procedural details and forensic reports, now shifted their attention fully to Lily. Her observation had confirmed what the dog had already indicated. Carl Benson was the person involved in the burglary. The room seemed to vibrate with the unspoken acknowledgement of the moment's gravity. Lawyers and officers whispered, jurors exchanged quick glances, and reporters leaned forward, pens poised, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. A child's voice, simple and pure, had altered the course of a serious criminal trial. Officer Daniels stepped forward, maintaining his calm authority. "Rex, remain," he commanded softly, acknowledging the dog's alignment with Lily's identification. He gave a brief explanation to the court, confirming that the demonstration had now served a dual purpose, to show the dog's capabilities and to highlight an unexpected but critical human witness. The courtroom absorbed the significance, murmurs spreading quietly as the reality sank in. Lily, oblivious to the astonishment she had caused, remained calm. Her finger stayed pointed, her eyes fixed on the accused. To her, it was a natural response. She had seen the truth, and now she had spoken it. Adults marveled at the clarity and certainty of such a young child. Margaret felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. Her daughter had not only observed the crime but had courageously revealed the truth, and in doing so had changed the entire dynamic of the courtroom. Carl Benson's lawyer rose quickly, attempting to maintain control, but the momentum had shifted. The child's words, reinforced by the trained response of Rex, had created a moment that no amount of argument could easily counter. The subtle gestures and observations of a 3-year-old were now at the center of a criminal case. The judge, recognizing the uniqueness of the situation, allowed a brief pause for the courtroom to collect itself, knowing that this moment would be remembered far longer than the legal arguments or procedural demonstrations that had preceded it. The weight of Lily's words, just 2 simple syllables, hung in the air. That one, the 2 words combined with her unwavering gaze and the pointing finger, had shifted the perception of everyone present. It was a reminder of the unexpected clarity that innocence and attention could bring. In that silent courtroom, where every adult had assumed control and understanding, it was a child's voice that revealed the truth in the most powerful, undeniable way. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, and murmurs reverberated off the wooden panels as everyone struggled to process what had just occurred. A 3-year-old girl had just pointed at the accused and declared, with perfect clarity, "That one." The judge slammed his gavel, but even the sharp clang could not immediately restore order. Journalists raised their pens, cameras flashed, and reporters scribbled furiously, trying to capture every detail of the shocking moment. The adults in the courtroom were stunned, unsure how to respond to such a revelation from someone so small yet so perceptive. Margaret clutched Lily tightly, holding her daughter close as a mixture of awe and fear coursed through her. "Honey, you were amazing," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Lily, unbothered by the commotion, simply looked up at her mother with wide, innocent eyes. To her, it was a matter-of-fact observation. She had noticed the truth and spoken it. The chaos around her did not faze her. She did not yet grasp the full magnitude of what she had accomplished. The jurors, meanwhile, sat frozen, their faces a mix of shock and admiration. The room's tension had escalated to a fever pitch. Lawyers on both sides adjusted in their seats, some whispering urgently to colleagues, others trying to regain composure. Carl Benson, the accused, visibly paled. His eyes darted frantically from Rex to Lily, then to the judge, as though searching for a way out of a situation he had never anticipated. He had expected evidence, witnesses, and legal maneuvering, but not a small child identifying him with such certainty. Rex, ever the professional, remained alert and focused. The dog's response to Lily's silent cue, combined with his trained instincts, created a subtle but undeniable reinforcement of her identification. Officer Daniels held the leash loosely but watched the alignment between dog and child with quiet satisfaction. Rex's calm yet deliberate confirmation of the suspect's presence left no room for doubt, even for those initially skeptical of a child's perception. The combination of innocence and professional skill created a moment that transcended ordinary courtroom procedure. The judge, recognizing the extraordinary circumstances, called for silence, his voice commanding yet tinged with astonishment. "Order in the court," he barked. The room fell into tense quiet once more. Everyone, from jurors to reporters, turned their attention fully to Lily. For a few moments, it was as if the entire courtroom collectively held its breath, waiting to see what this small witness would do next. The weight of the situation, previously carried by legal evidence and procedural formality, now rested on a tiny child who had simply observed and spoken. Lawyers scrambled to adjust. The prosecution quickly realized the significance of Lily's testimony. While she had not yet spoken beyond those 2 words, the clarity and precision of her observation provided an unspoken yet undeniable piece of evidence. The subtle alignment between the child's identification and the dog's trained instincts created a moment of extraordinary credibility. Witness statements and forensic reports were now reinforced by the pure observation of someone who had seen the events firsthand. This was a child's truth, uncolored by motive or fear. Carl Benson's lawyer attempted to interject, but the momentum had shifted irreversibly. "Your Honor," he began, voice rising slightly, "we need to reconsider the circumstances," but his words fell flat. The room's energy, now charged with the recognition of Lily's insight, made any argument feel secondary. Even the judge paused, allowing the moment to resonate fully. For the first time in the trial, adults were forced to acknowledge the power of perception that came not from training or experience, but from innocence and careful observation. Margaret watched her daughter with a mix of pride and concern. She whispered softly, "Lily, do you understand?" Lily shook her head slightly, blinking at the people around her. To her, it was simple. She had seen what she had seen and pointed it out. The adults, however, were struggling to reconcile their expectations with reality. A 3-year-old had disrupted the predictable flow of courtroom procedure and revealed something that even seasoned professionals had missed. Margaret realized that her daughter's keen observation, combined with her unfiltered honesty, had changed the trial in ways no one could have anticipated. Officers exchanged quiet nods and glances, understanding the weight of what had happened. Rex's behavior had validated Lily's identification, adding a professional confirmation to the child's intuitive observation. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted from disbelief to cautious acknowledgement. Adults began to murmur in hushed tones, discussing the unprecedented nature of the testimony and the extraordinary accuracy of a child's perception. For once, innocence had become the most powerful tool in a room full of experience, training, and authority. Carl Benson's composure deteriorated further. Beads of sweat formed on his brow as he realized that the simple words of a 3-year-old had exposed him more effectively than any forensic evidence or eyewitness account. He shifted nervously, attempting to maintain control, but the alignment between Rex's response and Lily's finger pointing left him with no room to maneuver. His lawyer, sensing the collapse of his defense, whispered urgently in his ear, but even those words could not undo the certainty created by a child's clear observation. Journalists captured every reaction: the shock of jurors, the pride of Margaret, the tense acknowledgement of officers, and the fear etched across the accused's face. The story was extraordinary. 2 words, "that one," had sent ripples through the courtroom, instantly becoming the defining moment of the trial. Outside the courthouse, townspeople would later recount the scene in vivid detail, amazed at how a tiny voice had shifted the balance of justice. The small witness had become a beacon of clarity in a room full of adults, and her courage and observation were impossible to ignore. The judge allowed a brief recess, giving everyone a moment to process the events. In the hallway, officers quietly discussed the implications, jurors whispered among themselves, and reporters feverishly typed notes into laptops. Margaret held Lily close, brushing back her hair and whispering reassurance. Lily, still calm, seemed unaware of the magnitude of her actions. To her, pointing and speaking the truth was natural. The extraordinary reaction of the adults, however, revealed just how impactful such a simple act could be. By the time the courtroom reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted permanently. The adults now recognized Lily's unique contribution to the trial. Lawyers approached their arguments with renewed awareness of the child's identification, adjusting strategy accordingly. Officers and detectives reevaluated the significance of her observation, realizing that sometimes the most accurate witness was not one trained in law or experience, but one guided purely by observation and innocence. The courtroom had learned a lesson that extended far beyond legal procedure. Truth can come from the most unexpected sources. Margaret, proud but anxious, looked down at Lily and whispered, "You helped everyone see the truth." Lily smiled faintly, her innocence still intact. She had done what she knew was right, and in doing so, she had changed the course of events. The adults, meanwhile, began to understand that this moment, two small words spoken by a 3-year-old, would be remembered long after the trial, as a testament to the extraordinary clarity of perception found in the most unlikely witnesses. And so the courtroom settled, the chaos slowly subsiding into a tense but focused order. Lily had spoken, Rex had confirmed, and the accused sat in stunned silence. The weight of truth, articulated in the most innocent way, had reshaped the trial. The community would later celebrate this moment as a remarkable example of courage, clarity, and the power of observation. In that silent courtroom, the extraordinary had been revealed, and everyone present had witnessed a rare and unforgettable convergence of innocence, skill, and justice. After the shock of Lily's words, the courtroom had settled into a tense, anticipatory quiet. Carl Benson, the accused, sat rigid in his chair, his knuckles white from gripping the edge of the bench. His confident demeanor from earlier in the trial had vanished, replaced by a palpable fear that he could not disguise. Every glance he cast toward Lily or Rex seemed to magnify his unease. The child's simple declaration, "that one," was like a mirror reflecting his guilt back at him, undeniable and piercing. Lawyers and officers sensed the moment had shifted irrevocably. The prosecution, buoyed by the extraordinary identification, approached the judge. "Your Honor," the lead attorney said, his voice calm but firm, "we believe the court has witnessed a pivotal confirmation of the suspect's identity. We request that we allow for further questioning of the accused based on the new developments." The judge nodded, adjusting his spectacles and peering over the top at Carl Benson. The room seemed to tighten, the weight of collective anticipation pressing down on every attendee. Carl's lawyer, pale and uneasy, whispered frantically in his client's ear. "Stay calm," he urged, though even he could see the tide of the trial had turned. Every angle, every defense strategy now seemed inadequate in the face of the clear, undeniable observation of a 3-year-old child. The accused swallowed hard, his eyes flicking nervously to Rex, then to Lily. He knew he could not escape the truth. The combination of her memory and the dog's trained instincts left no room for ambiguity. The judge signaled for Carl Benson to stand. With hesitant movements he obeyed, his body tense, every step measured yet unsteady. Officer Daniels allowed Rex to remain in front of him, the dog calm but watchful, responding to every subtle cue with precision. The room watched, hushed in anticipation, as the accused finally faced the culmination of the trial that had started with shattered glass, a tense investigation, and countless procedural formalities. Now all attention was on him, the small child who had observed everything, and the dog whose instincts could not be deceived. The prosecution began its questioning, carefully but deliberately, ensuring that the child's observations and the dog's behavior were connected to the unfolding narrative. "Mr. Benson," the attorney began, voice steady, The court has observed a unique identification from a witness present during the events in question. A child has pointed directly to you. Can you explain this? Carl's jaw tightened. He hesitated, eyes darting to the ground, then back to Lily. The memory of the night, the hurried movements, the careful but flawed attempts to avoid detection, all pressed down on him. For several long moments he remained silent. The tension in the courtroom grew almost unbearable. The jurors leaned forward, sensing the critical turning point in the trial. The officers exchanged quiet nods, and even the judge allowed the pause to stretch, recognizing that this was a pivotal moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, Carl Benson exhaled, a shaky, reluctant breath that seemed to release months of tension and fear. His voice, low but clear, finally broke the silence. "Yes," he admitted, his eyes avoiding direct contact with the child. I was at the Miller home that night. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. It was supposed to be quick, clean." His hands shook slightly as he continued, words spilling in a mixture of regret and fear. "I panicked. I didn't think I'd be caught. I didn't mean for it to go this far." The confession was unpolished, raw, and genuine, and it sent a ripple through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged glances, nodding subtly as the pieces of the puzzle finally aligned. The child's words, the dog's trained instincts, and the accused's own admission now formed a cohesive, undeniable truth. Lily, still seated in her yellow dress, watched quietly. She did not fully understand the legal significance of what was happening, but she recognized the change in Carl Benson. Her small voice had shifted the balance of the trial. The adults' reactions, the sudden quiet, and the tension in the accused's body confirmed what she had already known. She had spoken the truth. Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand, eyes misting with pride, realizing that Lily had contributed to justice in a way few could ever imagine. The courtroom slowly absorbed the magnitude of the confession. Officers moved discreetly, prepared to escort Carl Benson for processing, though the mood had shifted from tension to a sense of relief. The jurors, still leaning forward, murmured quietly to each other, digesting how a 3-year-old's clarity had played a decisive role in confirming guilt. Even the judge, known for his stern demeanor, allowed a brief, almost imperceptible smile, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances that had unfolded before him. News reporters who had been scribbling furiously and snapping photos sensed the historic nature of the moment. This was no ordinary trial. The story of a 3-year-old identifying a suspect with clarity, validated by a trained police dog, would reverberate far beyond Cedarville. Cameras captured every detail: the child pointing, the dog alert and focused, the accused's reaction, the proud yet nervous parents. Outside the courthouse, the town would later buzz with the extraordinary tale of innocence and observation, triumphing in the pursuit of justice. Officer Daniels released Rex briefly, allowing the dog to settle while keeping him nearby. He quietly explained to the court how Rex had responded instinctively, validating Lily's identification. "Rex's training allows him to detect and respond to specific cues," he said. "Today, the alignment between the child's observation and the dog's instincts confirms the suspect's involvement in the events under investigation." His words, calm and professional, reinforced the remarkable clarity of the moment. Adults and jurors alike nodded, acknowledging the undeniable truth presented before them. Margaret whispered softly to Lily, her voice shaking with emotion. "You were brave, sweetheart. You helped everyone understand the truth." Lily looked up, her small face calm and serene, seemingly unfazed by the attention or the gravity of the situation. For her, it had simply been a matter of noticing, remembering, and speaking. Her innocence, combined with acute observation, had shifted the balance of the trial and brought resolution to a case that had held the town in suspense. Carl Benson was quietly escorted from the courtroom. His confession, amplified by Lily's identification and Rex's behavior, left no room for ambiguity. The trial had reached a turning point where evidence, professional skill, and the perception of an unexpected witness converged to reveal the truth. The tension that had gripped Cedarville's courthouse for weeks was finally beginning to lift. Justice, shaped by an extraordinary combination of observation and courage, was now moving forward. As the courtroom began to settle, murmurs of admiration for Lily's role spread quietly among the attendees. Adults who had doubted the power of a child's observation now acknowledged the significance of her contribution. The combination of innocence, clarity, and courage had altered the course of events, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. Margaret, proud yet still anxious, held her daughter close, whispering words of love and reassurance. Lily's small voice had carried the truth, proving that even the youngest among us can wield remarkable power when guided by honesty and attention. In that moment, Cedarville's courthouse became more than a place of legal procedure. It had become a stage for a remarkable demonstration of clarity, courage, and the extraordinary impact of a child's observation. A tiny voice had shifted the narrative, a trained dog had confirmed it, and the accused had finally confronted the consequences of his actions. The town, the jurors, and everyone present would remember this day for years to come, not just for the crime, but for the way justice had been illuminated in the most unexpected way. With Carl Benson escorted from the courtroom, the tension that had gripped Cedarville's courthouse for weeks finally began to ease. The jurors, still absorbing the extraordinary events, murmured quietly among themselves. What had started as a routine burglary case had transformed into something remarkable, a story of innocence, courage, and the undeniable power of observation. In the center of it all was Lily, a tiny 3-year-old whose simple declaration, "That one," had shifted the entire course of justice. The judge addressed the courtroom, his voice steady but filled with a rare warmth. "This court has witnessed an unusual but undeniable demonstration of truth. The testimony and observation of the youngest witness present have provided clarity that corroborates the evidence collected by law enforcement. Let this serve as a reminder that justice can come from the most unexpected sources." His words resonated with every person in the room, emphasizing the unprecedented nature of the trial and the extraordinary role of a child's perception. Margaret held Lily close, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and amazement. Her daughter had displayed a level of observation and courage that belied her age. "You were so brave, Lily," Margaret whispered, brushing back the soft strands of hair from her daughter's face. Lily smiled faintly, her eyes wide but calm, still processing the commotion around her. To her, she had simply seen the truth and spoken it. The adults, astonishment, and the courtrooms all were secondary to the natural clarity of her actions. The officers and lawyers began to organize the remaining proceedings. Detective Harris and Officer Daniels quietly reviewed their notes, ensuring all procedural requirements were completed. The courtroom had already accepted the extraordinary circumstances. Lily's identification had aligned perfectly with Rex's trained instincts, and Carl Benson's confession left no room for doubt. This combination of evidence, professional skill, and child observation created a nearly irrefutable case, leaving the jury with a clear path forward. Outside the courtroom, news of the trial's climax began to spread. Reporters and townspeople who had gathered outside quickly shared the incredible story. Word traveled fast. Cedarville had witnessed something extraordinary. A tiny child had identified a suspect, a trained police dog had confirmed it, and the accused had finally confessed. The story captured the imagination of the town, transforming what could have been a simple crime into a remarkable tale of courage, observation, and justice. The jury deliberated briefly. Their discussion focused on the overwhelming clarity of the evidence and the testimony, both spoken and observed. Lily had been the silent catalyst, yet her impact was undeniable. Every detail from the investigation, combined with the demonstration of Rex's instincts and Lily's pivotal identification, led the jurors to a unanimous decision. When they returned to the courtroom, their faces were calm but determined, reflecting the gravity of the responsibility they carried and the rare nature of the evidence they had considered. The foreperson stood and announced the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Carl Benson, guilty of burglary. A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. Gasps of acknowledgement, subdued applause, and murmurs of approval echoed softly, all tempered by the recognition of the trial's extraordinary circumstances. For the Miller family, the town of Cedarville, and law enforcement, justice had been served in a way none could have anticipated. And at the center of it all, a small child had changed everything with two simple words. Margaret bent down to embrace Lily, tears of pride in her eyes. "You helped make things right, honey. You were so brave," she whispered. Lily's small hands rested gently on her mother's shoulders, and though she did not fully grasp the significance of her actions, she understood that she had made a difference. The adults around her recognized that bravery and insight were not limited by age. Sometimes, truth came in its purest form from the most unexpected source. The Miller family, grateful and relieved, expressed their deep appreciation. They knelt to speak to Lily, thanking her for her courage. The little girl, always gentle and observant, simply nodded, still processing the whirlwind of events. To her, it had been simple. She saw what happened, she spoke the truth, and justice had followed. The adults, however, marveled at the impact of her clarity and the role it had played in achieving closure for their family. Officer Daniels patted Rex on the head, acknowledging the dog's role in reinforcing Lily's identification. Rex, ever the professional, wagged his tail lightly but remained alert, his calm demeanor a subtle reminder of the power of trained instincts. The alignment between child and canine had created a moment of extraordinary clarity, demonstrating that even in complex situations, truth could emerge from unexpected sources. The courtroom had witnessed an intersection of innocence and skill that few would ever forget. In the days following the trial, Cedarville celebrated the unique circumstances of the case. Local newspapers ran stories highlighting Lily's courage and the remarkable collaboration between a child and a trained police dog. Residents recounted the events with amazement, marveling at how a 3-year-old had shifted the balance of justice. Schools invited Margaret and Lily to speak about observation, courage, and the importance of honesty. While Lily remained a child in her daily life, the story of her pivotal moment became a lesson for the entire community. Margaret reflected on the experience with a mix of awe and humility. She realized that her daughter's clarity, attention to detail, and courage had not only impacted a courtroom, but had also reminded adults of the importance of listening carefully, observing attentively, and trusting the insight of those we might underestimate. Lily had reminded everyone that justice and truth could emerge in the most unexpected ways, and that sometimes innocence could illuminate what experience and expertise alone could not. As life in Cedarville returned to normal, the memory of that courtroom moment lingered. Lily continued to play, laugh, and explore the world with the curiosity of a 3-year-old. Yet in the hearts and minds of those who witnessed the trial, her courage and insight remained unforgettable. The story of the tiny child who had spoken 2 words, changed the course of a trial, and contributed to justice became a legend in the town, a tale of hope, clarity, and the extraordinary power of observation. The Miller family finally felt a sense of closure. Their home, once shaken by fear, became a place of safety and warmth once more. Carl Benson faced the consequences of his actions, and the town of Cedarville recognized the profound lessons learned from the trial. And in the quiet moments, Margaret would look at her daughter and remember the extraordinary courage of a child whose voice, though small, carried the power to reveal the truth. In the end, justice had been served not just by evidence or procedure, but by the remarkable clarity of a 3-year-old's observation, the trained instincts of a loyal police dog, and the courage to speak the truth. Cedarville's courthouse would never forget the day when silence was broken by innocence, and a tiny voice changed everything.